Hello, I'm Pamela Young, and this is Thrive 2030, brought to you by growthcurv. Today I have with me Dave Maunsell, who's the Chief Executive of Haventec, which is a specialist company based in Sydney that works in the cybersecurity and data protection area. Hello, Dave. How are you today?
Very good, Pamela. How are you?
Good, thank you. Very nice to see you again, and thanks for sharing some time with us. Now, as you know, the reason that I have asked you to come and have a chat is because most of the people that I spoke to last year talked about the acceleration of their digital development, and I'm really concerned about what that means for people in your sector who are responsible for protecting the data. But before we move on, you tell us a little bit about your business. You're based in Sydney, and I'm going to join you there. Because I like to come to you so that people know where you are. And you had joined Haventec about 3 years ago after a 20-year career with Accenture, where you were the managing director of the financial services division, or group rather. And prior to that, you were their lead person in the digital development space. So you've had a very long tenure in working in digital, and you were also in cybersecurity data protection field 5 years earlier when you were working with the Australian Stock Exchange. So that adds up to about 28, almost 30 years in this field. So I'm hoping that you will, as the expert, the global expert, be able to help us with understanding what your sector has been seeing over the last 2 years in terms of the clients and industries that are rapidly improving on their digital take-up and how that's affecting their performance and what the risks are of that speed and pace. So before we get into the answer to that question, would you just like to highlight for people listening, Haventec has a specialty in this area. Your offer is quite different from what a lot of others provide. So could you just enlighten us on that first, please, Dave?
We certainly like to think it is differentiated from what others offer in the marketplace. The Haventec business itself has established a platform that it sells to enterprises to allow them to protect their most sensitive information. Specifically, if your usernames, passwords, and other sensitive data is protected by the Haventec platform, when your enterprise or even its cloud is breached, there's nothing of value to steal. And that is a rather unique proposition.
Right. Now, when we did a briefing just recently, you mentioned your method for securing data. Could you just describe that?
In actual fact, the good bit of context for that question is what's going on at the moment. And what's going on at the moment is more and more organizations are looking at digital channels as a means of getting access, cost-effective access to the marketplaces, sell them services and to service those marketplaces. And given the reach of digital channels, they're beyond geographical borders, it is a great way to also get access to a market beyond your primary headquarters or where your business is currently focused. The uptick in the use of digital channels is also correlated into an uptick in the use of usernames and passwords to authenticate customers. And I think I read a report late last year that the average person has now 100 username and passwords that they need to manage. And typically we find that if an organization is using a username and password to authenticate their customers into their digital channel, they're probably also storing some forms of sensitive information on behalf of that customer. Home address, phone number, email address, some other personally identifiable information. So with an uptick in the use of digital channels, we're seeing an increase in the use of usernames, passwords. We're seeing an increase in the amount of sensitive information that a business is holding on behalf of its customers. And unfortunately, we're also seeing an uptick in unauthorized access to that information as well. And we all are. We see on a regular basis that an incident has occurred and an organization has been breached and a group of username and passwords have been stolen or data has been stolen.
Haventec's response to that has been to do away with the password method of securing data? You've got a different offering?
Yeah, so Haventec response to that is to recognise the fact that current technology is not designed to protect sensitive information. It may be designed to slow down the impact of unauthorised access to that sensitive information, but its core purpose is not to stop information being stolen. And the innovations that sit at the core of the Haventec proposition are specifically around that point. What technology needs to exist to stop sensitive information being stolen? And that's what we provide to the marketplace. That can be integrated into your existing applications, into your existing data stores, into your existing file systems. You don't need to throw away what you've got. You integrate what we offer into your existing enterprise solutions, but with a specific purpose to protect that information.
Sure. So Dave, over the last couple of years, what have you seen in your client base and across major industries in terms of the rapid acceleration of digital development? What's your assessment of what you've seen and whether people are doing it safely? Are they managing their data as they're doing this?
I mentioned I joined the business about 3 years ago. In actual fact, it was just before the current pandemic started to uptick in January of 2020. We were seeing in 2019 lots of interest from our clients in digital transformation and using digital channels to get to their customers. Mm-hmm. It would be fair and unsurprisingly to say that focus turned very quickly in early 2020 to getting employees securely and safely from their homes digitally into the enterprise so that the organisation could continue to operate. And lots of organisations, we saw it with some of our clients, but also talking to other technology providers in the space. We saw programs that would have taken months to get approved and then years to get done happening over the course of a couple of months. So we saw an acceleration in investments and transformations associated with allowing remote work to occur for knowledge workers and other people that could work remotely. Yeah. That did then also, unfortunately, coincide with an uptick in organisations, individuals looking for gaps and weaknesses in this new distributed, employee model. Yeah. And they found those successfully. So organisations who were simply relying on extending what they've got out to the homes of their employees were finding that wasn't providing the type of protection that they needed for both their employees' sensitive information as well as their customer data.
So how did they manage it? What were their responses to that?
The responsibilities have been to accelerate some of the investment in tools, technology, and partners that are going to allow them to provide to their employees a safer and more secure working environment when they are working remotely. Yeah. We saw an uptick in VPN. We saw lots of organisations introducing multi-factor authentication for their customer base that were working remotely. Mm-hmm. We also saw the inclusion of new steps in a authentication and authorization process for individuals connecting to that business remotely. Mm-hmm. What we also saw is employees taking on more friction. So it being harder to get into work remotely. I've got to load this tool, and then I've got to sign into this tool, and then I've got to load this system, and I've got to then sign into this system, and then I've got to check my mobile phone, I've got to type in a 6-digit number, and then 30 minutes later I've got to do it all again because I was inactive for 15 minutes. So we also saw a lot of the weaknesses that remained inherent within the technology that was being used to bring these workers in remotely, being pushed out to the user. And by having the user ultimately navigate more steps or processes that they hadn't otherwise done when they were, say, previously working from the office. So a lot of friction ended up in the user experience space for a lot of the solutions that have been adopted.
Do you think that friction has been managed and mitigated over the 18 months of the journey? Do you think most organisations have been able to resolve that, or are the employees still dealing with that friction?
Well, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. I think, my broader observation, that more modern businesses that don't have a large legacy footprint that they, need to bring along on the journey, but have built their businesses on, cloud platforms. I think they've had the ability to introduce solutions that, don't add to the friction.
Yes.
But for some of those other organisations where there is still a hosted or legacy investment in technology, they've struggled to remove some of that friction from the employee authentication experience. If we're investing in digital channels or tools for our employees to do their job efficiently, effectively, and safely, what I have seen is an increased awareness of the need to ensure that what's been put in place not only delivers, the underlying safety and privacy expectations of the employee and the data that they're using, but putting in solutions that drive adoption. That, if you're putting in a CRM solution, you don't want to make it so hard to get into that CRM solution that people aren't using it, because you've invested in that CRM solution to get value for the business. And so we're seeing an uptick in organizations looking at the need to make it secure and easy for their customers their employees to identify themselves, but doing that in a way that's not cumbersome, simple, convenient, and secure.
So that's putting pressure on digital developers to do a better job, isn't it? To expand on their innovations more quickly, to make the customer experience, both for clients and employees, to improve that, to make it more streamlined. Have you seen any major developments over the last 12 months?
Yeah, we have, and I mean, this is somewhat back to what we do and why we exist. We've seen developers and engineers building digital solutions, thinking about not just delivering a safe and functionally rich experience, but delivering an experience that's easy to use, an experience that people want to gravitate back to, so that drives adoption. And they're good things, right? Because that's all sort of leads back to a return on investment for that asset that's being delivered out via the digital channel. We're seeing an uptick in organisations that provide easy means of integrating other offers into those digital experiences to allow them to get access to some of these points that I've raised. So, an engineer building a new, a group of engineers working on a new digital experience for a business, they don't need to, from scratch now, build everything themselves. They can get their cloud provider to provide a lot of the infrastructure needed to bring that digital experience to life. And then, for some of the technology decisions they made, a lot of the technology decisions are surrounded by technology marketplaces. Those technology marketplaces provide easy access to, through integration patterns, solutions to complement and enhance whatever the digital offer is. So for some of our, we've recently completed work to integrate into the Microsoft Azure platform. So if we've got Azure customers out there and they're looking to get access to passwordless multi-factor authentication, and they've made a decision to deploy their digital solution on Azure, it's as simple as going to the Azure marketplace, connecting to our integration pattern, making the configuration changes, and then they've got access to our solution from within their Microsoft region.
Have you seen any disasters or catastrophes that you can share with us over the last 12 to 18 months that have arisen because of the pace of digital development that people have been pushed into because of locked borders and having to work from home?
I think
you don't need to say who they're with, but just give us a sense of what you've seen.
We won't, but I'm not going to. I won't talk about specifics, but I'll talk more broadly. I mean, this is for organisations who are using digital channels to engage with their customer base and their employees, they need to, the successful ones that we're coming across in the marketplace are assuming they are going to be breached, they're going to be impacted by a blunder, human error, or they've got some other business process that's not as good as it could be and could be leaking some information out. So between a breach, a blunder, and a bad business process, the organisations that we're seeing that are coping well with this moment have thought about the fact that these things are going to occur. They're going to. It's not an if for them; it's a when. And they're designing around that particular point. They're assuming one or multiple of these things are going to happen. So what do they need in place to minimise the impact of one of those things occurring, or multiple of those things occurring if you're a bit unlucky, and that having on that organisation's customers and the business more broadly? And I think that mindset of when, not if, is, certainly the organisations that we're dealing with that are approaching it with the when, are doing it in a way that are ultimately, they're architecting a more resilient business. And more resilient business, we're on 24/7. All of our customers are 24/7 customers. You want a resilient business. You need a resilient business to both effectively operate and compete for the 24/7 customer.
Yes. What do you think 2022 is going to require?
Wow.
I mean, people have made their adjustments. They've been effective of working from home. Now borders are opening up, lockdowns are ending. Some people, maybe 50% are working at home still, but the others are coming to the office. So there's a rebalancing back into what we used to know, but not fully. There's still a global supply chain blockage. There are still some markets that are quite heavily locked down. So it's not an open economy, a global economy yet. And I'm just wondering, in terms of those that have made significant developments in their digital space and data protection to date, what are the things that they can do in their next, because this is what people listening will be thinking about, what can we do to protect ourselves further? What is the next innovation? What should we be thinking about? Because there's a lot of hacking going on at government level. So, we can expect that the more we use digital channels, the more things are going to come unstuck. In an interview last year, I think it was with MasterCard, they had invested in cybersecurity companies themselves to protect the data for their customers because they saw that was going to be a challenge. I heard from some people that there was a rising anxiety over the apps that we have on our phones to track where we're going and our COVID passes and things, which is raising anxiety about Big Brother keeping an eye on where we're going every minute, every day. So there's a lot of things that have occurred over the last 12 months which have put us all in a very different place. We're living differently, as you say. We're using more digital channels to work with customers and clients and friends and family, but we're also using our mobiles and a lot more apps to track our health and where we're going, etc., for COVID pass purposes. All of this is creating a potential risk for us.
Yeah. So, but I'm hopeful about the future. We're seeing innovations and the adoption of those innovations occurring now that certainly leaves me with hope that we're recognizing some of the limitations of the technology that we've adopted and have got us to this particular point, and we're doing something about it. Let me paint a future. So over the last decade, we've seen more data being stored centrally. We've seen more personally identifiable information stored centrally. And to a certain extent, a lot of that some of it's not, but a lot of that personal information is, what could be described as a bit disposable. So take, for example, a username and password. As inconvenient as it might be, especially if you've reused your username and password across multiple providers, but as inconvenient as it might be losing it, the process to recover from that situation is to go and get a new one. And a lot of the data that we're losing at the moment, there's some that's not reusable, disposable, and it can be renewed, but a lot of it is. The data sets that are going to make big changes for all of us in the future are immutable data sets, and they are going to start to be stored online. And we can't afford to lose those even once.
What are they? I'll give you say that again, Dave. What are they called?
Immutable data sets.
Immutable. What does immutable mean?
They don't change.
Oh, okay.
They're not renewable.
Okay.
And I'll give you your thumbprint. That is an immutable data set. If you're using your thumbprint across multiple digital services, you can only afford to lose that once and no longer trust it.
Yeah.
It's not like a username and password. If you decide in the future to go and get a full genomic sequence, where are you going to store that? Because you would worry a little bit that it's going to be stolen if it's been stored in a similar solution that's currently sitting in many organizations.
Yes.
I think if you believe that this data wave that we're on at the moment is going to ultimately see more important and more immutable data sets being used to support us through different stages of our life, then what I would hope is we are seeing organizations start to think about that now, and start to think about that now also in the context of the emergence of quantum computing, which is going to change the game for a lot of organizations and a lot of the means by which they currently rely on protecting sensitive information. Mm-hmm. To that end, tangible recommendations, looking into quantum resistant architectures now. It's not about adopting them, but looking into them now, and how do you carve out a path to a target state that is quantum resistant. For the storing of central information, organizations no longer need to store that centrally, store that as like a honeypot. There are technologies emerging now that decentralize sensitive information. Now, the applicability of that to your business, you can start to road test that right now. There are suppliers in the marketplace that offer decentralized data storage. Decentralized data storage is significantly more effective at protecting sensitive information.
So my thumbprint and my facial recognition on my iPhone, they could be stolen. Is that what you're saying? They could be stolen and used?
Well, there's already, not just me, if you can do a quick search on the web and you can see what organizations and what technologists are doing, playing with technology that mimics your face, if they get access to it. Mm-hmm. And there's already been cases where biometric templates, so thumbs, have been stolen. A couple of high-profile ones in the UK. So this information can be stolen. The means by which the organisations go about storing that information, that's going to be often, it's not necessarily exposed to consumers, but the enterprises that are making a decision, if they are storing biometric templates, how they do that in a way so that they can't be stolen, that should be taken into account when they're making their decision on the solution they put in place.
So is there a better answer to how we should protect our data if it's not the passwords that we make up and we're using biometrics, facial recognition or thumbprints? Is the next generation going to arrive at something else that's more secure?
Yes, Tim Berners-Lee's Solid initiative is a great example of standards, the emerging standards and ideas around how information at this particular moment can be protected in such a way that it's not at risk of being stolen in a mass data breach or a mass password breach. So this is a great example of that emerging. Some of the blockchain technology use distributed ledgers to protect sensitive information. And in Haventec's business, so there's a genuinely Australian innovation. We've not only design, but we've built a platform that does just that. If your username and passwords are protected by us, we decentralize the information we use to digitally identify yourself. If our customers' enterprises are ever breached, those passwords can't be stolen.
Yeah.
And so there is technology that's not only has emerged, but it's being used right now to protect sensitive information on behalf of Australian customers. Okay.
Now, you just mentioned Australian, which takes me to this morning's Australian Financial Review. There was an article in their piece of research that's put out by the Treasury, and it says, just quote from it here, Australian businesses are failing to invest adequately in cutting-edge technologies and falling behind global peers on productivity, which is contributing to a slowdown in people's living standards. They suggest that it's a lack of competition in the market, so there's no pressure on people to invest in their digital development and keep up to speed with the rest of the world. So I'm just wondering on that last comment, when you sort of mention what's happening in Australia, you do have some international clients, and of course in your previous career you've worked globally a lot. How do you feel Australia, is that report accurate? Is it your observation that it's that far behind the rest of the world? And if so, what are your thoughts about what the local industry should be doing to catch up?
Well, I probably have a very different perspective because I'm in the rather enviable position that the clients that we're working with are innovative. That's why that's why we're partnering with them, and the implementation of solutions that we're doing with them. So in actual fact, I don't think our Australian clients are any less innovative than our European clients or any North American clients. I think they're equally is innovative. More broadly, and I, the full read on the report and the data set used, what I have noticed over the last couple of years is that as organizations have gone about distributing their workforce out to their homes, I think there does certainly feel to be a little bit of a tick down in the number of larger transformations that are going on. And often those transformations are a great vehicle for the introduction, adoption, and implementation of innovative ideas. And so while more broadly, maybe there has been a tick down in the adoption of innovative solution by Australian businesses, I don't think there's an inherent problem with innovation being adopted by Australians, but I think maybe the causal factor for that, certainly if that research data includes the last couple of years, is maybe the distributed workforce didn't, the one of the implications of distributing workforce was to take on less organizational change, less transformational change, and that has led to less innovations being introduced into the enterprise. Lack of competition, it only takes one to go, and I think we're quite well serviced here as Australians. I've travelled around the place. There's a level of efficiencies here associated with the number of players in the marketplace. Does competition drive better and faster decisions? Certainly does. But I think there's certainly in the sectors that we're involved in, there's a level of competition that exists, and one of the reasons that, or one of the key reasons that an organisation will partner with us beyond the privacy piece, is because it does enhance their ability to compete in the digital channel. We offer a simple, convenient authentication solution that drives adoption, and that's about competition.
The report also, highlighted the productivity of the nation they called it a paltry 0.2% in the last financial year, which is obviously, to do with COVID and the slowdown and the lockdowns and the many businesses and hospitality and tourism and, the industries that couldn't operate would have affected that. However, as I'm talking with people about, how they've responded to the pandemic and where they're at now, there's a sense that now borders are opening up. Maybe we're at the end of the pandemic. The Omicron numbers are high, but, we don't suffer quite so badly from it. So there is a sense that maybe this year we can start to grow again. And I'm wondering, if you're working with, very senior executives of major industries, and whether you see a balance, that have they got things in balance, or that's going to allow them to invest and put time into growth and innovation to boost the productivity numbers, which are extremely low. When I speak to people in Asian nations, their product productivity is, quite often hovering around 3%, 4%, and some still expecting 7%, which is much, much higher because in Asia, things operate at a different pace. And I'm just wondering, when you're looking across the executive leadership group, do you feel that they've got the balance right in terms of, the time that they should be putting into development and innovations that's going to lead to growth? Or are they still suffering from managing the catastrophe of the last 2 years, managing the challenges that came with the last 2 years?
Look, unfortunately, I think it's a little bit of the latter still. The workforce is being distributed. They're now looking at, bringing them back together. But what's also occurring now is we are seeing an uptick, just the organisations that we deal with. We're seeing an uptick in dealing with new people because the old people have left. So which is a little bit tough.
Quite a
lot of turnover amongst the customer base, or the roles are still unfilled. And so I think a lot of leadership attention will be, not only bringing the teams back together when it makes sense and is safe for their particular business, but also integrating new team members to help drive whatever the next wave of change is, but to backfill where there's been an uptick in resignations across the business, because we're definitely seeing that. And I think as you go through that hump, finding people to join the team to backfill a role that was recently vacated, competition's fierce.
Oh, I was just going to say, what is
for
the
engineers?
Is it that they've been poached? Is that the main reason why they're moving?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, poached. So via search, poached. And then the recruitment process for inbounds, you'll get to letter offers, and they're looking within a couple of hours at an offer from somebody else that's 20-30% above where you landed.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think that problem certainly, and I've got somewhat of a bias in the context of engineers, because we're heavily dependent on engineers in our team, but we're certainly seeing that market being very competitive at the moment. The flip is, if you've got a good purpose, we're able to secure people, and I think partly it's not the only reason why we're able to secure, but having a purpose that they can align with has been, it's one of the typically top 6 or top 3 things that they come back with on, why'd you end up joining? I liked your purpose.
Yes, I think that's becoming more evident, and the chief executive that gets that is going to be the one who is going to have a stronger following, because the why has to come before the what. What are you doing and how are you going to do it? But the why's got to come first, to engage people emotionally and to make them feel like they're contributing to something that's worthy. And especially during difficult times like a pandemic, you need to have that need for them to feel like, I've got to stick with you because I really believe in what you're doing.
Yeah.
So just coming back to your answer, which is they're still responding to the challenges of the last couple of years, and one of those major challenges you've just highlighted is change of staff. So therefore, there's nothing worse than losing your staff when you've got a problem. Someone who's been around for a long time, knows the business, and that they know how to, corral the team and get the result done. So that puts a lot of pressure on the top team. What sort of pressures are you seeing, and how is the top team responding?
Well, it does, but I'm not sure if they're any different in the moment to those pressures as any other time in our history. I think the top team has a responsibility to create a culture that's, consistent with the goals of the business, the purpose of the business, the vision of the business, and attracting people to that business who are going to enhance both the culture as well as the value of the business. And I think, whether it's COVID times or whatever the next challenge on the radar is, I think the opportunity for any leader in any business is, how do they find a group of, I'm not going to say like-minded people, because I don't really like like-minded people. I prefer to have challenging points of view at the top table, but a group of individuals that other people want to be around. They don't just manage the team, but they mentor the team. They've got the mindset to understand that if they've got an employee or a team member that needs to be at home 4 days a week, then that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like and I think that mindset that looks after the individual, that doesn't see the individual or the team as purely a means to an ends, but a collective or an individual that wants to spend time with you and your business to help it, for them to grow and to help it make it successful, finding people like that to bring into your team. And then, and, I encourage, certainly across our organisation, a attitude of try and make yourself redundant. And the reason I do that is to look to strip inefficiency from the things that we do, but also for then, for people to grow. If they can figure out a means of taking their current workload and delegating that across their team, that's going to give their team the opportunity to grow and develop some new skills that they hadn't had. That's then going to free up that individual's time to do the same for the individual above them in the organisation. And that constant, not wait to be handed the promotion or the new role or the additional responsibilities, but to go after them.
Yes. So what kind of skills would you suggest senior leaders need for the next 3 years going forward? What weaknesses have you noticed over the last couple of years that have, things that have been missing? Because as I say, the pandemic's put pressure on all of us to learn new things really quickly. It has highlighted for us what we don't know, and where we need to put some time into development. What would be your advice to leaders going forward, thinking about the ongoing acceleration of digital developments and the take-up of channels? What should they do to skill themselves up to be more savvy in their decision-making going forward?
The number of organisations that we talk to who are placing material investments and therefore material bets on enhancing a set of technology offerings that are dependent on digital channels to get access to their customers, yet nobody on the board understands cyber or digital. I worry about those organisations and those clients. I do think that the more successful of those organisations that we partner with, they've got people that when we need to interact with the board, we're not educating them, but they're in the conversation with us. They're understanding the pros and cons of certain situations, and they've got the background and the experience to understand, why certain advice or certain recommendations are being made. I think for those, I don't think any large mining business would contemplate having, a board that didn't include some people that knew mining. But it's not uncommon to go into an organisation that's got a large digital channel and meet people that, or meet boards that, that don't have the depth and experience, at least in a couple of board members, and how to get the most out of digital channels and what to worry about and what not necessarily to worry about. And look, I know this is not supposed to be a scare tactic at all, but the internet's a pretty hostile zone. it is exceedingly easy to make some bad decisions and not know you've made those bad decisions for 12 to 18 months' time when you've disbanded the team around the transformation.
Yeah. Example of a bad decision that you've seen?
Well, you see the consequences of bad decisions and the breaches that go on, right?
Yes.
So I'm sure that any of the organisations that have been breached recently or even prior to the pandemic, if you go back, the reason that gap existed was either a blunder, and so you've gone, okay, well, a bad decision in that space is why did we leave that particular bit of our operation exposed to a blunder or a breach that somebody has made, unfortunately, left a gap, left a hole, left something undone, cut the budget for the operational team, and therefore things aren't patched.
Yeah.
And if you don't, if you're going to a senior leadership team and they're making some decisions on budget and they say, well, what's this line item here to do with patching our technology? Mm-hmm. If you don't understand the importance of that particular line item in the context of operating a safe and secure business, especially one that's connected to the internet, then a bad decision will probably be made. And you might not know till 18 months later the consequence of that bad decision when somebody takes advantage of the fact that some of your internet-facing or public-facing technology is not patched.
Okay. Dave, I'd like to ask one last question before we go, and that's about the startup community. You are on the advisory board of 3 startups, and I'm just thinking it would be a good idea for us to hear from you what is happening in the Australian startup community right now, because some stories that I've heard about what's happening up in Asia is, there are some fantastic things going on, and I just wondered if you could share with us what you're seeing that is truly innovative, what sectors are doing the best, getting the most attraction. Is there a trend that you can share with us?
Well, I do think there's a level of newfound confidence and enthusiasm amongst the startups and the scale-ups that we deal with, and a couple that I advise, off the back of some great local stories of organisations that have started here in Oz, scaled out of Oz, and got some great results. Atlassian and Afterpay, the obvious couple of examples, because they're proof points that it can be done. Yes. You come up with a good idea. You don't need to be headquartered in North America to take advantage of that good idea. There are skills, capabilities, the means by which a startup can start here, can remain headquartered here, and be super successful. So the fact that we've got those out there, I think there's a level of confidence amongst those who are involved in the startup and scale-up community. The couple of examples I'm involved with are less about incremental innovation, and they're more about transformational innovation. They're not taking an existing idea and making it a bit better, but they're looking at pockets of the marketplace and how they could be transformed through a new idea. So harder, like a lot harder to do because it's more seismic change across an industry sector or across a couple of industry sectors. Mm-hmm. But, maybe some great ideas if we can figure out how to get them to a point where they can scale to help with some of the productivity targets that or productivity ambitions or aspirations that we may have if we wanted to get closer to Asia. My other observation is I'm seeing some really great talent and great experience who maybe, over the past couple of years would have continued with the large corporate. Yeah. But they've come out of that and they've said, in actual fact, and maybe it's about purpose or maybe it's about taking something off the bucket list, but I've seen some really great talent come out of the large corporates who have gone into, higher risk next phase of their journey, where they and a group of not like-minded individuals gathered around a particular idea and they're looking to grow it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks, Dave. Look, I can't let you go unless I ask you the ultimate question, which is the very final question that I ask everybody. If you were chief executive of the world sometime in the future, what would be on the top of your mind to address in your first 100 days?
First 100 days, top priority, debt. Figuring out a way of addressing the noose with which, lots of the parts of the world still struggle with, and that's the debt they carry. There has to be, if we can free up a population, get rid of the debt and focus on growth, I think we will be in a lot better spot.
And how would you go about doing that?
Well, I don't know the how.
Just the what.
90 days isn't the 90 days coming up with the ideas. If I knew the how, I think I'd put my hand up to it.
The why?
Well, I think the why
is that about global equity?
Yeah, but the why does provide some options to move, large parts of the population out of the poverty line, beyond the poverty line. Mm-hmm. And that feels like a pretty good why. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Dave. It's really great to have your contribution, and it's fantastic to talk specifically about the digital channels and the whole cyber and data protection questions, because we all have to face them every day. And every time I swipe my COVID pass somewhere, I think, there they go, they know where I am now. I've gone from that shop to that shop, and you do get the sense of being tracked. So I think the concerns are, not just from an individual point of view, but from a company's point of view, they're just going to be ever increasing. And companies like yours need to innovate and get ahead of the curve, don't they? So that you can anticipate our needs and customers' needs and be there to support us over the next, the journey, so that we all hear it to thrive to 2030. So thank you for your contribution from Sydney. I really appreciate it, Dave from Haventec. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Dave. Super.